today's discussion. What is Koinos Podcast going to be about?
That's what we want to get together and discuss today, and then solicit feedback from the community. We've already been talking with Rhubarb about this.
But first, actually, Rhubarb Marketing, some people may not even know who they are. We found them because they were a former, what's this bubble?
Thumbs up. That wasn't me.
AI. No, but we found Rhubarb Marketing through Cast. So they were the marketing team behind Cast, and they worked with them for 2 years now. And Koinos, we felt like we had a lot of things in common with Cast, decentralized launch.
Well, I think we share an ethos with CASPA,
Mm-hmm.
and there isn't a lot of overlap between our protocols. We came across their proposal, and what we really liked about it is how community oriented it was, and how it was really about supporting grassroots movements and really about facilitating communication and collaboration within the community, and then galvanizing the community to market the product. It's more like educating the community about how to increase awareness of what they're doing, which is very aligned with how I think many of us were thinking about what Koinos needed, right? We've got a decentralized community, and you and I were talking about this before we hit record, and I think this plays into where we see the Koinos podcast going, and the function, and one of the functions that it should serve is coordination and communication within this decentralized organization. So you have all these people with skills and interests, often doing all kinds of things to try to help improve the ecosystem and increase awareness of the ecosystem. But there's no connective tissue. There's no higher level organization in those cases, especially in those cases where you have a fair launch like CASPA and like Koinos. So that's where the fair launch component really comes in and becomes important in the decision to go with Rhubarb Media, which was a community decision. And this is a community project. It was funded by the community. Koinos Group was not involved at all, which is awesome. And we're so grateful to the community members who did that legwork and who footed that bill, because it really was a community effort. But we couldn't be happier with the decision. And we did weigh in and say, look, this proposal is great. It's the best proposal we've ever seen. And we've seen marketing proposals. And I think it stems back to that fair launch origins, that work that they've done with CASPA. I think it's going to provide incalculable value to the Koinos community, because we're younger, we're newer than other blockchains. And so getting them to come in and take their many years of expertise in blockchain marketing, understanding a fair launch protocol and the consequences of having a truly decentralized community, and then applying it to our unique feature set could be huge.
They came in, and one of the recommendations observations was that the Koinos ecosystem is everybody's doing things all over the place. And one of the recommendations was to bring this podcast. And I think what they mentioned is that we need a way to get people to have a collective understanding of where we're at, the ecosystem as a whole, what projects are doing, what are they launching, and to get more developers understanding how this ecosystem is growing. And I think what's important here is that we create a podcast that allows us to get this information out to people and be the voice that represents the community. And in a way, after this podcast, people in the community can say, hey, here's what's going on. They can have that inner dialogue, the thought process of, hey, why am I part of this community? Maybe developers come in and say, I like what this community is doing. I want to be a part of it. But we got to start somewhere. And that's one of the observations that Rhubarb Media made, and was what ultimately kind of triggered this podcast. But we're still trying to figure out what this podcast is really going to talk about. And I don't think there may be any rules for this at all.
No, and I'm thinking of the Koinos podcast as an umbrella channel that other people can get involved in and contribute to. In fact, we should talk about that, because we see already 2 avenues that we want to go. But I want to highlight an important point that you made. So we have these 2 conflicting things, right? Everybody's like, there are these groups, where's the transparency? But you also people need a space where they can go, where they can communicate, where it's not going to get overridden with noise. So, these are just challenges that we need to deal with. The point is, we want the transparency. We want the organization. We want people to be able to see what's going on within these groups and see the opportunities to participate in these groups, but we also want the groups to be effective. And so I think that's one of the purposes that we have in mind with the Koinos podcast. And I do want to get into the two basic types of content
avenues.
The two avenues that we want to go down. But I also just want to highlight that we want to put stuff out that could also bring people in, right? So we have two problems that we see being solved with this content: increasing communication and coordination within the community, creating better cohesion and understanding within the community, but also putting stuff out there that other people can see and say, interesting stuff is going on in there. Lots of stuff is going on within that community. I want to get involved, and then giving them a deep reservoir of content and information that they can dive into to find their place.
One thing about podcasts, I think the issue that, a lot of you guys have, you as in the community members have, is that when you're trying to get information, man, you come into the Telegram chat room and say, hey, what's happening with this? Or you come into Discord and you say, hey, what's going on with this? Next thing you know, 10 people have 10 different opinions about what's going on, and they're plastering information. You can't digest it. All of a sudden, what happens? You ask the question and then you don't interact again. People don't even speak English sometimes. And they're getting all this information. It's very intimidating. And so I hope that this podcast becomes something that lowers the intimidation level and it becomes more digestible.
The challenge that I see us facing within Koinos Group, I think, is totally representative of the challenge that we face as a community. I believe that Koinos is uniquely suited to empower entrepreneurs and developers to turn their passions into their livelihoods. But there's two components to doing that. There's the technology. For Koinos Group, it's Koinos Pro, but there's also a lot more to building a successful business, to getting entrepreneurs and developers across the finish line with a product that's generating revenue. I think we as a community need to be thinking about these two separate things as well. And this podcast is a clear example of that, right? There's stuff other than the tools. We have to collaborate. We have to work together. We have to connect people. We have to share ideas, share feedback. What good is an application if it hasn't gotten any feedback from real people and real users? And so I see this podcast as a critical component of helping developers and entrepreneurs turn their passions into their livelihoods. And the tech is part of that, but it's just one part of that. There's all this other human stuff that needs to be done. And this is a first step to that. It's yet another tool. Koinos is, the unbounded nature of it is great at bringing people together because there's no limitations. It's not just for technical people. And this is why we have to appeal to both entrepreneurs and developers. These are two sides of the same coin, and we can and we must communicate with both of these groups and bring those groups together, because that's where the alchemy comes from, is these two types of people working together, working with other people to bring their vision, whatever that vision is, to life.
The unbounded nature of Koinos exactly leads to chaos. And the chaos is what we're all seeing right now. The Koinos podcast is about reeling in some of that insanity, having a focal point. And so these podcasts become these focal points that we're going to look at these things and individually, really judge them for what they are. What do they provide? Who are the people behind it? And give people a voice. And so I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah, but in doing it in an open and transparent way, where if you have a project and you want to talk to people, you are invited. This is not a top-down thing, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to participate in the content creation process, you are invited. If you want to appear in one of these channels, you are invited. Our goal is to expose people to more information and more people within this community, not to rule in a top-down manner. Far from it. Now, the question is, how do we get there? And I think that that's going to take a lot of work on our part. You probably use a ton of help. I think bringing people into the content production process, and by production, I mean post-production. So the editing process, generating materials, generating clips, but I think step
Time
one.
stamping.
Yeah, exactly. So please, we would love to get the help. I think step one for us is Ron and I really focusing on this. Obviously Steve and Michael have to remain focused on Koinos Pro. That's the best thing for Koinos, is to have them focused on Koinos Pro. But what are Ron and I working on? I want this to be our focus, getting this content production machine churning out content with as high a frequency as possible, but we also want it to be high quality. I want to turn this into a channel that rivals major crypto publications, because I think we can do that. I think Koinos has broad appeal. I think that we can, that by making it about entrepreneurs and developers and empowering them, and just involving the Koinos community and bringing in those developers, I think that can be very broadly appealing. Our ethos is open and not maximalist. It's perfect for a more broadly appealing podcast. And we shouldn't be putting out episodes that that a random entrepreneur or a random developer or a random crypto community member who has an open mind, they should all be able to enjoy our content and feel welcomed as an audience member, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great summary. If you guys can produce content on a weekly basis or every other week, I think what things like the community can do to help is to, at first initially, it's gonna be very difficult, but you release the content, help timestamp, help pick out those clips that you want to hear more about, right? And then we can categorize and figure out what topic is really vibing with the community. I would like to get people to tell me what they liked about the long form Koinos podcast, and then I can pick apart that specific item that you liked a lot, condense it down even further, and make it more accessible. So let's do it. Let's put the work in and see how far we can get, and what kind of help we can gather.
So I think somewhere that community members could be a huge help to you in the kind of content that you want to create is providing you with that information. In fact, I think this is the only way that it works. You can't know about everything that's going on. I can't know about everything that's going on. The information has to come to you, and so people bringing you that information, whether it's the developers who are building the tools and the applications who have information that they want to get out, Julian submitting a governance proposal, right? I think part of what's exciting about what we're doing is that it's going to create a lot of opportunities for people to help. Everybody can communicate. Everybody can use their words to increase awareness of what we're doing. And so I think there are going to be a lot of opportunities for people to contribute. And I hope and I expect that people will take advantage of those opportunities. So overall, I'm super excited about this. I'm really looking forward to building out this podcast. And I think it's going to be a huge help to the community. I did want to make a small note here of something that I think is important to do within the community. And this might sound silly, but I think we all need to work together and think about and talk about titles and ways to organize these groups. Does every group need a communications person, right? We need better structure within our groups. We need universality within the community. Is there a developer within the group? Is there a communications person within the group? Is there a decision maker within the group? Are these different roles? Are they not, right? If we're not going to have these decisions made in a top-down way, which I do not think we should, we still have to make the decisions. We still have to come up with these solutions, because if it's nobody's responsibility within the group to communicate about what the group is doing, guess what's going to happen?
Nothing.
There's not going to be communication about what the group is doing, right? So we need roles, and I think we need roles and responsibilities. Every organization, every relationship. I was talking about this with my wife the other day. We were like, we need more clear delineation between what's your role and what's my role, and what are your responsibilities and what are my responsibilities. Because if we don't have that clarity, we're stepping on each other's toes. We're duplicating work. You're not doing something I think you should be doing. You're doing something I don't think you should be doing. And that leads to chaos.
Yeah. It leads to more chaos, but the second you organize it, leads to more productivity, which is more important. And I think people should be self-appointing these roles themselves, right? And then not saying like, hey, I'm going to be ahead of this, but saying, I'm going to take these actions.
I want to. And by the way, this is how agile organizations, corporations, multi-billion-dollar companies, it's how they work too. Take the responsibility. It's how Koinos Group works. You think something's important, you think it needs to be done, take it on, be accountable for getting it done. If it works, you get the credit. If it doesn't work, you messed up. And now let's figure out, and now let's try again and let's figure something out. Yeah. I mean, I love this. I think that it's important for people to understand this is how truly decentralized and open source organizations actually work, in case it's not right for you. Because what I love about these types of organizations, and I believe that Koinos is the pinnacle of this kind of organization, is that you can come in and you can take on whatever role and responsibility you want. If you want to build the next Uber, you can take on that responsibility. Who's going to stop you? If you want to be the head of communications for Koinos, who's going to stop you? There's somebody else who wants it? Compete. Great. Koinos, now there's two of you. Anyone can come in here and suggest something better and try to do something better. And no one's going to say, no, you can't do that, because you have a platform that was designed from the ground up to support you in however you want it to. So as long as you have the coin to do it, as long as you have the network resources to do what you want to do, you can do it.
And if you don't, as long as there's someone else with the resources that believes in your voice, then you have a multiplying effect and someone will help you get it done. I think that's great.
That's a really important distinction to make, because it's unique to Koinos. Okay, I can come in here. I do have a vision. I do have some impact that I want to do. I do have a role that I want to serve, but I don't have the capital. Okay, there's probably a gazillion people out there with surplus resources that they would love to allocate to you if you have a good idea and if you have the ability to actually execute.
Community is literally looking for people who have an idea to execute, looking for people, begging, absolutely starving for this, for the people who fill this role. And that's what the podcast is really about. Finding those people, because the community is absolutely hungry, because they have an asset, they have the technology to be able to share that value and empower people who have that voice. I think it's a great place to end this podcast, to be honest with you. My first task would be to wait for you guys to get this podcast so I can create some short form content from it.
Sounds good. And look forward to hearing people's feedback on the things that we've discussed in this episode.
Perfect.